All right, we are talking about reset. Jesus, reset my voice. And I've given this the subtitle of Good News for Bad Times. We certainly have seen the impact of words this past week, haven't we? For good and bad of the things that can happen when we're not careful about the words that we choose to speak or how we choose to speak them. And so we are today talking about that in this series, Reset, where we believe that Jesus changes everything. And so in 4 simple prayers, we're asking Jesus to make a major overhaul of our lives, to bring it into where He created us to be. Remember, to reset something is to bring it back in line with its original design, so that it can function the way that it was originally intended to function. God created us. He has a design in mind. He knew exactly how He created us and why He created us. Sin broke that functionality within us. We do not operate according to His plans for our lives because of sin. And so we come and we say, Jesus, would you reset my soul? Would you reset my spirit? Would you reset who I am? Would you reset my heart? Would you reset my mind? Would you reset my voice? And then next week when we talk about, would you reset my hands? But we're asking for a complete reset so that we can be the people that God calls us to be. He does not call us to speak indiscriminately. I know we're Americans and we ought to be able to say whatever we want. Jesus says that there are some consequences for doing that. And we see those consequences playing out every day somewhere in our lives or in the lives of people around us. And so today we're going to give some consideration to how Jesus resets our voice and what we need to do about that and what needs to take place. Understanding that when we let Jesus reset our voice, that at that point we are moving into maybe one of the most risky areas of the Christian life, when we let Jesus have control of our mouth, when we let Him have control of our words. On the other hand, nothing is maybe more rewarding in the Christian life than when we're able to speak up on behalf of Jesus. And so we're going to look at how that plays out, what God wants to do in our lives. Our scripture today is Psalm 71, 2 verses 15 and 16. And there the psalmist says this, "My mouth will tell of your righteousness, of your salvation all day long, though I know not its measure. I will come and proclaim your mighty acts, O sovereign Lord. I will proclaim your righteousness, yours alone." Now that's a remarkable, those are some remarkable statements. That God, my mouth will tell of your righteous deeds. That God, I will tell of your saving acts all day long. That is this tremendously noble goal, isn't it? In fact, it is a goal that can be described in a certain way. There's a in preacher talk, and I've never heard it much of anyplace else, but preachers like to use this term, BHAG. And it's an acronym for the letters BHAG. For a big, hairy, audacious goal. It means we try to stay really, nice in our speech. And so a big, hairy, audacious goal. That is one, if there ever was one, that's it, isn't it? That I will use my voice on a daily basis, constantly, to give glory and honor to God. That I will talk about His righteous acts and His deeds over and over again, all day long. Every time I open my mouth and talk, what comes out will be something God honoring and nothing else. A BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And we ask ourselves, well, golly, Pastor Terrell, is that even possible? Is that just so out there that nobody's ever going to be able to do that? That's just just pie in the sky kind of thinking. Is it even conceivable that could take place? And because normally when we talk, we talk about other kinds of things, don't we? We talk about we talk about the weather, we talk about politics, we talk about sports, we talk about the Cardinals and the D-backs, and we talk about the favorite restaurants we go to, the movie we just saw, all those kinds of things. But very seldom do we hear things coming out about God and His righteousness and His deeds and His mighty acts. And so you ask yourself, you know what? Is this spiritual stuff even happening in our midst? Who does this? Who lives like this? Who talks like this? Well, let me give you the short end of that answer. The short end of that answer of who does this, who lives like this, who talks like this, is that it's not many people. It's just very few people that do that. Does that mean it's something we just have to not pay attention to, or is there something else going on? Not many people do that. Not many people live like that. Not many people talk like that. At least that's what research shows. A recent study was reported in Scientific American, and it revealed that in general, people in the United States spend at least 60% of our conversational time talking about one thing and one thing only. Anybody want to hazard a guess about what that one thing and one thing only is? Yeah, ourselves. We talk about us. We talk about me. We talk about my life. Not even so much in plural, it's just about me. I talk about me 60% of the time. Imagine that. We talk about ourselves. That's a lot of self-disclosure, isn't it? That's an awful lot about what's going on in our lives. And what's more, it just happens it's so prevalent. I picked up my phone yesterday. Actually, it was on my tablet at that time, but I was maybe you've heard this website called BookBub. You ever heard that? And if you read online, like with Kindle and online books, it's not a bad place to go, because you can snag a lot of books really for free or for $1 or a couple of dollars, and that you'd pay a lot more money for, and even in the Kindle store and places like that, and it comes out. You can get it. You got to watch it. I mean, it's like everything else. You got to censor it, and you can say, send me ideas in certain areas and forget all the other trash. But you can get Christian books. There's some really good books in there. You can get Christian fiction and nonfiction. You can get humor. And so I have about 2 or 3 categories. Christian fiction and nonfiction and humor. And yesterday, and I picked it up. I know what I'm going to preach about today. And I looked, and the very first book it recommended for 99 cents was Enough About You. I'm thinking, great. They know what the issue is. We talk about ourselves 60% of the time. They're going to, in a humorous way, help us not do that. You would think, but that's not what they were doing. They were saying in a humorous way, let me help you do it better. Let me help you do it more. This is how they described this book. This hilarious guide to embracing narcissism. We'll teach you how to put yourself first. In all aspects of your life, we're already spending 60% doing this. Do we need to get any better at it? Are we going to need a book to tell us how to do it better? And for those of you who are on Facebook and other social media platforms, do you know how much time you spend talking about yourself? Not 60%, but 80% of your time. 80% of the stuff that you post on Facebook is telling about you. A lot more self-disclosure that is going on. And so we have this issue going on. And if that's not enough, it just kind of pervades all of society, Christian and non-Christian. You remember the song, I want to talk about me, I want to talk about I want to talk about number one, oh my, me, my. Thank you, Toby. For those of you who don't know who Toby is, how about Bette Midler? Bette Midler had a line in the movie Beaches, but enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think about me? All right, I'll quit. Back to the research. These scientists wanted to know why we do this. What part of our brain thinks this is a good idea? What part of our brain will cause us to do that? So they got 200 people who decided, yeah, we'll be a part of that contest, that study you're going to do. And they hooked them up to these probes, and they probed their brain, and they let them do self-talk. They said, just talk about yourself. And when they would talk, it would light up they hoped it would light up certain areas of their brains so they would know what part of their brain was triggering this self-talk, this self-speak, if you will. They were more than surprised by the results. It was very revealing, because what happened was that when they began to talk about themselves, there were two parts of their brain, two sections of their brains that just lit up like Christmas trees. You know what those two parts of our brain are normally indications of? They light up when we are experiencing pleasure. It is like the pleasure that we experience when we're having sex or when we are eating really, really good food. And when we're talking about ourselves, apparently. So, you think about some of the most pleasurable things that you enjoy, a really, really gourmet meal, and talking about yourself, and they're pretty much the same thing in terms of giving you pleasure. No wonder we spend 60 and 80% of our time talking about ourselves. And I want you to understand, I am not talking about going home and stopping self-disclosure. I don't want you, husbands, to say to your wives, Pastor says I can't talk about you. Can't talk about me. It's not my fault. I'm going to have to watch the game now. I'm sorry. Don't blame me for that. That's not what I'm saying. You still have to talk to each other, all right? And you need to share feelings and all that kind of stuff. And guys, I know you think, I don't want to do that, but you got to do it anyway somewhat. But somewhere in here we have this tension that is going on in our lives. And it's because our society is so very adept at self-centeredness, and because it feels so very good when we're self-centered, that it's going to take some really serious effort and work on our part to be able to come to a point where we have this Psalm 71 thing in place, where we say, but God, I'm going to speak about you. I'm going to speak about Jesus in my life. I'm going to speak about your glory. Because on the one hand, I have Psalm 71 says, my mouth will tell of your righteous deeds and your saving acts all day long. I will come and proclaim your mighty acts. Sovereign Lord, I will proclaim your righteous deeds, yours alone. And on the other side, I'm saying, but enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think about me? How do we reconcile those two dichotomous things that are going on in our lives? They're pulling us apart, not bringing us together. So there's this disconnect here. But things don't have to stay disconnected for long. They don't have to stay that way. That's what I want you to hear today. That it's a broken system inside of us, but it's not ours to have to fix. And the reason is because it's already been fixed. The work has already been done. It is Jesus who did the work. It is Jesus who changes everything. He already did the work at the cross. Remember, I said that this is really a sin issue. It is our speech is broken because of sin in our lives, and that was settled at the cross. Jesus defeated sin and death and Satan at the cross, and he rose again so that we have victorious lives. We don't have to figure out how to fix it. Jesus will fix it. We just have to ask him to do it. We have to accept the fix in our lives. We don't have to live with this dichotomy about whether I talk about me or I talk about Jesus. I can have Jesus be in control, because if he's controlling my heart, and that's why we started there, and he's in control of my mind then, and that's why we moved there, then he will be in control of my voice. He will be in control of my words. And we'll be able to see something happen that will glorify him. Now, this story in chapter 71 is really not it is not just a big, hairy, audacious goal. It is really a guarantee that when I let Jesus reset my heart, when I let him reset my mind, then I will be positioned in a place where he can reset my voice at the same time. So we turn to the New Testament and we see the story that Jesus tells in Matthew chapter 12. So if you're there in your Bible, turn to Matthew 12. It's in your. I printed it out in your sermon notes as well. It's not a very long story. It's just verses 33 to 37. So follow along with me. Jesus said these words: "Make a tree good, and its fruit will be good, or make a tree bad, and its fruit will be bad. For a tree is recognized by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? For out of the overflow of the heart the mouth speaks. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him. But I tell you that men will have to give an account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned." Those are hard words, because we don't really like having to be accountable. We're not really keen on that necessarily. We don't want somebody saying, "You know what? If you're going to say it, you're going to have to be accountable for what you said." We want somebody else. We won't be able to say what we want, but without accountability. But Jesus says that's not the way the world works. That's not the way he created things. He said, this is the way that I created things to be. This is the way that I designed you to be. He designs us to be accountable with the words that we use. And he says that out of our heart then will flow the words that come. And so we don't even have anybody to blame it on, because it's what's in our heart that does that. Let me tell you the story about a man, a pastor by the name of Nick Hall. Nick was traveling. He was speaking in a few cities, and he was between cities. He went down to catch an airplane late one evening, and he was tired. And as he got on the airplane, he asked the flight attendant. He said, "Is there a place in this airplane where there'll be an empty row and I can just catch some sleep here for a couple hours while we're flying?" And she said, "I don't know. You'll have to take your seat right now that's assigned, and I'll get back to you if I find one." And in a few minutes, he sat down, and a few minutes later, a young man came onto the plane, and he was wearing his fatigues. He's obviously in the Army. And he was young. He was about 18, 19 years old. And he sat down next to Nick. And as he sat down, he was obviously in distress. He was fidgety. He was agitated. He was nervous. And so they talked for a moment. And Nick found out that this young man had just gotten out of basic training in the Army, and that in a very short time he was on his way to the Middle East to war. And he was afraid, and he was nervous, and just not sure what to do about that. So they sat there for a couple of minutes, and the flight attendant came up, and she said, "Sir," she said, "I have a row for you back in the back, and nobody's there, and you can go ahead and do that." And so Nick stood up, and he shook hands with this young man, wished him good luck, and went back to the back to sit down and take a nap as soon as the flight got off the ground. Sat down, no more than he sat down, reached down to get his seatbelt on, started to put the seatbelt on, and it was as if God just spoke to him in very clear terms the question, "What are you doing in this seat? What are you doing here? This is not where you belong." And he's thinking, "But I really want a nap. I am exhausted. And I got a whole row with nobody in it but just me. I could stretch out. What are you doing here, Nick?" He knew. Never buckled the seatbelt. put it back, walked back up to where his original seat was. The young man was already starting to stretch out so he could take a nap. So, I'm sorry. He said, can I sit here with you for a minute? He said, can I pray with you? The young soldier looked at him and said, yeah, you could do that. Nick sat down, prayed with him. Prayed about God's peace to come in his life. Prayed about the anxiety. Prayed about the future. Ended up sitting there the whole flight, talking to this young soldier. By the time they landed in the next city, less than 2 hours later, this young man had asked Jesus to reset his heart. He had come to faith in Jesus Christ. Nick took that opportunity to share his faith and his life. Bible said here in Matthew, in Jesus' words, that out of the overflow of your heart, your mouth will speak. Those aren't my words, those are his words. He said, that's how it is. That what's in your heart is going to come out through your lips. What you speak is what's already there in your heart. And the truth for today that I want you to get is so important that when your heart is full of Jesus, Jesus will show up in your words. If your heart is full, hear it again, if it's full of Jesus, then Jesus is going to show up in your words. It will just happen. You need to know that that is the truth. So how does that apply to us? How does that link to us today as believers in the 21st century? So, well, that's good for 2,000 years ago. What about today? Does it apply today? And it does. I want you to see that there's this powerful progression that takes place. That when you come to Christ and you say, would you reset my heart? And He does, and He gives you a brand new heart, and He takes up residence within you, and you give Him control of your heart, that things begin to change. And then you say, Jesus, I want you to reset my mind. And He does, and our mind gets reset. And coming out of that, then there's an opportunity for Jesus to reset our mouth, because our heart has changed, and the thing we think about has changed, and now the words that we speak change as well. And that's God's plan. That's what He wants. He wants us to do that. He says, I want you to get to that point where you are where your heart has been changed because of truth, and your mind now is accepting truth because of your heart is changed, and now you begin to speak truth because your heart is changed. And when we do that, we stop talking less about ourselves. And we stop talking less about politics and sports and finances and the restaurant down the street and what's on at the theater now, nearly as much as we begin to talk about Jesus. Because He is the one who did that. He is the one who changed everything. It becomes not a contriving of situations. It's just that the more we choose to press into the faith in Jesus instead of faith in self, the more we saturate our minds with Scripture, that the more of ourselves Psalm 71 begins to become true. The Psalm 71 thing begins to work again. My mouth will tell of your righteousness, of your salvation all day long. And although I may not know its measure, I will come and proclaim your mighty acts, O sovereign Lord. I will proclaim your righteousness, yours alone. So the questions come again. Who does this? Who lives like this? Who talks like this? And the long answer is that we do, or we can, or literally you can. And you don't have to wait for weeks or months or years. It can start today. Starting today, you can. You can speak like that. The rest of the story of Nick Hall and the soldier, at its core, this story is about doing what? It's about seeing an opportunity to speak and seizing that opportunity. You seize it before it's gone. Think about this. There was just a moment of time there on that airplane when the soldier's in the front and Nick Hall is in the back. He sat down. He grabbed a hold of the seatbelt so they could take off. And had he locked that seatbelt in place and the plane took off, he would have been asleep in no time. And the young man would have been asleep in no time. There was just a moment to seize. The opportunity was there, and he seized it. He said, I can't let this pass by. I'm going to seize it right now. That's what we're talking about today. It is noticing those opportunities and seizing them. Anybody here want to venture a guess as to who was the original master at doing that very same thing? We're in church. If you're in church and they say you want to guess who it was, best answer is always Jesus. You'll very seldom be wrong, okay? Odds are in your favor. So say it with me. Jesus. Jesus was the one who was really good at this. He always spoke this way. It was Jesus. We sing, Jesus is the sweetest name I know, and He is. And we ought to say that word. Say it with me. Jesus. 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 One of the things that we have a generation who are spiritually minded, who want to think about God, but they don't have any parameters on who God is. A lot of them will just want to define who God is, but when you talk about Jesus, they stop and they say, well, wait a minute. I thought we were just talking about a God who's just kind of really ambivalent and doesn't have any really parameters, and that we don't know who He is. When we talk about Jesus, we're talking about somebody very specific, aren't we? We're saying that Jesus is God, and God is Jesus. And so we talk about Jesus, and so a lot of times we want to share with our friends. We say, well, we're talking about God. Well, yeah, you don't know what they mean by God. You're talking about Jesus, and now it really narrows it down. So we got to get used to talking about Jesus. We need to do that. And why? Because He was a master at this, and He was not like a parent who says, do as I say, not as I do. Some of you parents might resonate with this. Some of you older people will certainly resonate with it. You ever been to a store and you hear a little kid screaming and out of control? Yeah, I want to go, I want down, I want this, I want that, and they're just screaming up a storm. And maybe they're on the same aisle as you are. I love it when they're on the other side of the aisle and they're like, there's all this noise. And then what happens? You hear this poor, stressed out mom, and she says, quit screaming! And I'm thinking, well, duh, where do you think that kid learned it from? We're really good at saying, do as I say, not as I do. And Jesus said, do as I do. And so we have Jesus who says, you know what? I'm going to speak, and I want you to say exactly the kinds of things that I say. He says, I want you to speak truth. I want you to speak love. I want you to speak kindness. I want you to speak forgiveness. I want you to speak things like restoration and healing and peace and joy and hope. Those are the things that I want you to do. So you ask, well, did Jesus speak those things? As those are the things that Jesus said? And the answer is absolutely, He did. Those were the things that Jesus spoke. Those were the words that came through His lips. Those were what His heart was, and out of His heart flowed those words. Let me give you some examples. To the wind and the waves, Jesus spoke peace, didn't He? He said, be still. To Lazarus, He spoke restoration. He said, come forth. And he did. He spoke to Nicodemus. He spoke truth to Nicodemus, who needed truth. And he said, you must be born again. And he was. And he spoke to an inquisitive lawyer. He said, you need love. He said, you need to love God. You need to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And to a man who had a withered hand, he spoke healing. And to his disciples, he spoke comfort. He said, listen, he said, don't let your heart be troubled, and he gave them rest. And to us, to all of us who need hope, he says, and I will come again for you and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. On and on we could go. Over and over again, the words of Jesus were words that are the things that he asked us to say today. And you know the neat thing, one of the neatest things about being a Christian is that we get to speak them. We get to speak the very words of Jesus. We get to speak the things that are in the heart of Jesus, because he is in our heart. He is in our lives, and he renews, he resets our heart, and he resets our mind. And out of our heart then will flow the words of Jesus. And they will be words of hope and peace and joy and love and comfort that our world needs, that they don't get anywhere else. That has got to be the coolest thing there is about being a Christian, that God allows us that privilege. So what do we take away from this today? Let me share just two quick takeaways from you as we wrap this up. And I've already spoken about both of them. I just want to kind of cement them in your thinking for just a moment. First of all, for those of you who have allowed Jesus to reset your heart and mind, don't be surprised when you're given the opportunity to speak up for God. Jesus did not reset your heart and your mind and now your voice in order for you to sit and be quiet or to not pay attention to the opportunities that are around you. So don't be surprised when he's going to give you opportunities. Jesus reset my voice, but please don't let me speak. That doesn't make sense, does it? Jesus reset my voice, but I don't plan to say anything. That doesn't make any sense either, does it? Jesus reset my voice because I really expect that you're going to give me opportunities. And guess what? He will. He will give you opportunities. He will give you the opportunity. So don't be surprised by that. Don't say, whoa, where did this come from? Just be expecting it. Be on the lookout. Because if you surrendered yourself to the rule and reign of Jesus, those opportunities are just going to come. They're going to keep marching through your life. You mark my word on that. They're going to come your way. And then secondly, when those opportunities to speak about God, about him, when they surface, don't be shy about seizing them. Don't be shy about it. Don't say, oh, I don't know, I better buckle my seatbelt anyway. They're going to take you in places that you're not necessarily always comfortable. They're going to take you at places when you're too tired to go. They're going to take you in places where you're afraid. But God is going to say, seize them anyway. Here's the opportunity. I want you to seize it. Here's the chance to speak for me. I want you to speak up. I want what is in your heart to flow out, and it's going to glorify me. So whether you're asked to speak on a flight when you're exhausted and you need a nap, or the hallway of your school, or your family's Christmas celebration, or Thanksgiving celebration, or whatever it might be, or whether you're talking to your neighbor in the backyard, having a backyard conversation, when that opportunity comes, make sure that you seize it and you take that opportunity to point people to a life of hope and peace. You talk about Jesus. You point them that way. In Ephesians chapter 5, Paul reminds us that life is short, that our days are short. In verses 15 and 16 of Ephesians 5, he says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but wise, making, and underline these words, the most of every opportunity. Making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. He's going to give you the opportunities, but expects you to seize them and make the most of them and not let them pass by. Later on in that same passage, a couple verses later, he says this, be filled with the Spirit. Speak to one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Book of Proverbs, Solomon calls those kinds of words apt words. They're pertinent words. They're words of encouragement. Jesus says in Matthew, they're the right words at the right time. So take advantage of that opportunity. God has put you in that position. He gives you that chance to share, and now use those words in a way that will bring Him glory. There are people all around us who are desperate for somebody to speak to them. But to speak to them the words of hope, to speak to them the words of peace. They are stressed. They are under constraints. They are afraid of tomorrow. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't even want to get up tomorrow. And they are embarrassed by their lifestyles. They don't know what to do about it. And they're saying, will somebody speak words of forgiveness to me? Will somebody speak words of caring? Will somebody speak words of encouragement? Will somebody speak words of love? Will somebody speak words of hope? And please be that somebody. Let Jesus reset your heart and your mind, and then out of the overflow of your heart, let those words of Jesus flow out. The world around you is desperate to hear them. And they don't have any place else to get it. See, God has placed those people around you. He has placed you in a sphere of individuals and families, a sphere of influence for a reason. And that reason centers on sharing good news. Good news for bad times. We know what the bad times are. The people you're around know what bad times are. What they don't know is what the good news is. And you're the ones who need to share. We're the ones who get to share His grace, His love, His peace, His joy. Would you be sharing that? Would you take the time and the effort to share that good news? Some of them are saying it out loud. Some of them are just saying it silently. But they're listening. So simply seize the opportunities that God is going to place before you.